You might have heard in the news about the lunar eclipse that's supposed to happen this week across the world, and it's supposed to be the longest lunar eclipse of the century, and that is true. Not necessarily the longest, it's actually should be rephrased and said the longest partial lunar eclipse of the century. It's actually going to be the longest partial lunar eclipse to happen for the next several centuries. However, there will definitely be some longer total lunar eclipses coming up, but this is the longest partial lunar eclipse. Now, lunar eclipse is when the moon passes into the Earth's shadow, and there's a nice little diagram right here, courtesy of spaceweather.com. And so it can only happen during a full moon because that's when the moon could be potentially aligned with the Earth's shadow. And so when it disappears behind the shadow, that's when you get a lunar eclipse. And as it slips into the shadow, the moon gradually disappears, or it doesn't completely disappear, but if it gets deep into the shadow, it will turn red, as you can see in this diagram here. And most of the moon is expected to be encompassed by the umbra, or the inner part of the Earth's shadow. Only a tiny little sliver on the southern edge of the moon is expected to remain lit up for this lunar eclipse. So about 97% of the moon will be eclipsed at its peak, and it will literally last pretty much most of the night. Like after midnight, this eclipse will be ongoing most of the night. So it is a particularly long lunar eclipse, and it's almost a total lunar eclipse. You can see again, like 97% of the moon will be covered by the Earth's shadow. So you're going to get a very similar effect as you would in a total lunar eclipse. This one will be particularly special, not only due to its length, but because we got that little tiny sliver still poking out of the umbra. You'll kind of get this nice, bright ring around the southern part of the moon, while the rest of the moon is darkened or reddened in this case. So it's going to be particularly photogenic, I think. And so these are the times of the eclipse. The eclipse is actually supposed to begin earlier than 1:19 a.m. Central Time, but before then, it's not really particularly visible. It's passing into the penumbra. Uh, the penumbra is a very light portion of the shadow. You don't really see much. You might see a very slight darkening of the moon's surface. It's not particularly exciting, but some people will start watching it much earlier than that. But the most visible portion of the eclipse will begin at 1:19 a.m. Central Time, reaching a peak at 3:03 a.m. That's when 97% of the moon will be covered by the shadow, and the partial eclipse will end at 4:47 a.m. Now the eclipse will still be ongoing after 4:47 because it still has to pass through the penumbra. So the eclipse will technically be ongoing probably right up till sunrise, honestly. So very long lunar eclipse. And I have included the times for other time zones. You know, you can just add or subtract an hours as needed. The specific time, you can see in Pacific time, technically it begins at 11:19 p.m. on the 18th. So for most of the U.S., it will be in the early Friday morning, essentially, on the 19th. So there you go. There's Mountain Time, and there's Eastern Time. So Eastern Time, the moon's going to be setting as the eclipse ends because the sun's coming up, the moon's setting at that time. So the moon will be pretty low late in the eclipse, which actually might produce some pretty spectacular photos. Also ongoing with this eclipse, again, this graphic is courtesy of earthsky.org. Um, there will be a meteor shower going on called the Leonids, and the Leonids are not particularly strong this year. It's known for some big outbursts every 33 years or so, but this is not an outburst year, so do expect an increase in the amount of meteors. It just peaked. I think the peak night was just last night, so it's still expected to be pretty prevalent going into tonight, into Friday morning. So expect some meteors to be radiating from the east after dark. Um, Leonids can produce very bright meteors at times, so yeah, it'll be quite the spectacle. And this is just an overall viewing conditions forecast. This is just as a general just as a general tool to look at. I encourage you that if you do want to watch the lunar eclipse tonight, and you might be, say, you're in a fair or poor viewing area, just kind of watch your local weather, because sometimes the weather can vary quite dramatically locally. So you still may have a chance. Just because you're in the red area does not mean you won't see it, but you just have less of a chance just based on the forecast that I'm seeing. Now, this is based off of forecast sky cover across much of the central United States. In the green, you can see there, that's where we're expecting considerably less cloud cover. In some cases, it would be like clear to mostly clear across that wide stretch in the green there. So that would stretch all the way from central Arizona all the way up into central Wisconsin and over towards um, western Carolinas and Virginia. There's the yellow area indicates fair viewing conditions. This is where we may have some clouds throughout the night, but there either is expected to be a clearing sometime during the eclipse, or it's expected to only be a partial cloud cover. So you may still be able to see the moon. And the red is poor viewing conditions. That's where we're expecting very thick clouds to persist most or all of the night. Unfortunately, this isn't looking too good for the northwestern United States. It just looks like clouds are going to be really pesky and not looking like it's going to move very much throughout the night. And then portions of the East Coast also may experience poor viewing conditions. But again, please check your local forecast as the time gets closer to the eclipse. Just see if anything changes. This is as of right now. So if you have any questions, let me know. And good luck to anyone who is watching the lunar eclipse / meteor shower tonight.